Hi everyone. Today I want to talk about the Oculus Rift versus the HTC Vive. So these are both great virtual reality headsets for the PC, and I have played a ton of VR games on both of them. I got the Vive first, so this thing arrived on April 5th, and I put in a solid month of VR playing on this. And then my Oculus Rift arrived about 2 weeks ago, and I've been playing this one exclusively ever since then. So in this video, the first thing I'm going to do is give kind of a general high-level overview of what I think the strengths and weaknesses of each device are. And then in the second part, I'm going to go more in depth into the technical details of each device, like the display and the actual build of the devices. But before I start, I just need to get something out of the way, and that is that this is kind of an unfair comparison. Because right now, the Vive offers everything that the Rift offers, but it also has motion control and room scale, which the Rift does not, and those things add a ton to the VR experience. So the Vive really gives you the complete VR package, whereas the Rift is more limited. But I'm not going to spend this video just singing the praises of the Vive and trashing on the Rift, because the Rift actually is a great device. And the advantages of the Rift right now lie more in the ergonomic design and the lightweight, which makes it more suitable for long play sessions, and in my opinion, it is the superior device for seated VR just because of the comfort factor. So one of the first things I want to talk about in this comparison is comfort. So comfort is a big deal in VR. You're going to be strapping these devices to your face for hours on end, and you want them to be comfortable. And that is the one area where I feel like the Rift has an advantage. I do feel like the Rift is much more comfortable than the Vive, which is not to say that the Vive is an uncomfortable device. It's fairly comfortable, it's just a little less comfortable than the Rift. One of the reasons for that is the weight. So if you weigh these two devices, you will see that the Vive is about 100 grams heavier. And 100 grams, all things considered, is not that much, but the main difference comes from the fact that the weight on the Vive is all front-loaded into this big, bulky front part, whereas the weight on the Rift is more distributed all throughout the headset, and as a result, when you're wearing this thing, it feels much lighter on your face than the Vive. Another aspect to the comfort of these two devices is the cord. So the Vive has this kind of thick 3-in-1 cord that provides power, it provides HDMI and USB, and it runs down the middle and out the back of the Vive. The Rift has one single cord that provides HDMI and USB, and the nice thing about it is that it's offset, so it runs off to the side, and that's really nice when you're in seated VR because you don't really feel the cord with the with the Rift, because it's running off to the side. Whereas if you're trying to do seated VR with the Vive, you're going to have to either run the cord over the back of your chair, which is kind of awkward when you have a chair with a high back like this one, or you're going to have to run it down your back, which is a little uncomfortable. Another aspect of the comfort of these devices is the audio. So the Rift comes with an integrated audio solution, these little ear pads, and they're really nice and comfy and easy to set up because they're super adjustable. I also like them when you're talking to someone and you're in VR because you can easily just like flip them away from your ears, hear what the other person is trying to say, and then flip them back when you want to go back into VR. They're also removable, so if you want to use a wireless headset, you can remove these and you can put that on. Although if you want to use earbuds or a wired headset, you're going to have a little trouble with that because there's no way to connect them directly to the headset. You have to run the wire from your computer to your ears, and that doesn't sound optimal to me. The Vive has a nice solution where it has this little tendril with an audio connector in it, and you can either use the provided HTC earbuds, which are really high quality. Personally, I hate earbuds. I think they're uncomfortable, so I went ahead and bought a nice high-quality pair of over-the-ear earphones, and these are very comfortable. They have really good sound quality. They're by Sennheiser, so they're really nice, and I would say they're much higher quality than the integrated Rift earbuds. So if you're an audiophile, that's points to the Vive right there because you can choose what audio you want. One thing about having these over-the-ear earphones connected to the Vive is that it really adds to kind of the whole process of putting it on and taking off the whole setup. So what I've found is when you're using the Vive, you want to put it on, you want to adjust it so it's comfortable and so you have maximum clarity. And then you want to keep it in that position as long as possible. You just want to keep it on your face. So you want to use the camera to look around in the real world and do things like grab some water to drink or whatever. And you want to take it off as little as possible. Whereas with the Rift, since it's so lightweight, you can just be constantly flipping in and out of VR and you'll be perfectly fine. And so I mentioned the camera on the Vive, which lets you see the real world in this kind of weird green glowy matrixy way. And the Oculus does not have a camera like that. What it has, however, is a huge gap by your nose. So you can actually look down and you can see through this little gap in the bottom of the Rift. And even though it's kind of a small gap, it's enough that you can like see your phone. Like I was using the Rift yesterday and playing Boom Beach on my phone at the same time just by looking down through the gap. And so it probably sounds like it's a massive flaw, but it's really not. You don't notice the gap when you're looking straight ahead into the sweet spot, which is how you're supposed to use VR. Is you're supposed to look into the center of the lens, which is called the sweet spot, and then move your head to look around rather than moving your eyes, because when you move your eyes, you're actually going to see the limitations of the FOV, field of view, in VR. And the other thing about this gap in the Rift is that it provides some ventilation for your face. So the Vive kind of straps super tight to your face and doesn't really have much ventilation. I mean, it does have a slight gap of its own, but I do find that when you're wearing this thing, it can get really hot in there and really swampy and sweaty, and then that leads me to the next aspect, which is the facial padding. So the Vive has these really thick facial pads, and it comes with two of them, one for narrow faces and one for wide faces. Although I use both of them interchangeably and I don't really notice a difference. The reason I change them out is because you can, like, these things like absorb sweat, and it's kind of gross because it does get hotter in here than it does on the Rift, and you are moving around and doing physical activities, so you might start to sweat and it's going to get absorbed by these pads and eventually get gross, especially if you're sharing it with other people. Whereas with the Rift, it also has pads, but they are kind of more hard. They're not squishy, thick pads, and they're not as comfy on your face, but since this thing is so lightweight, it doesn't really make a difference, and the whole thing does feel overall more comfortable. Alright, so I do believe that the Rift is the more comfortable device overall, but when it comes down to it, what VR for me is really about is the games, and the Vive gives you the superior gaming experience in my opinion, because it supports roomscale, and these roomscale games are crazy fun, crazy intuitive and innovative, and they just feel like a whole new form of gaming. And you really just have to experience it for yourself to understand, because it's hard to display it on a screen, but when you're in the game and you're moving around, and you're actually moving around in the game and the real world, and you have your motion controllers, and they're usually morphed to like a sword or a hand or a gun or whatever in the game, but you can move them around in the game, and you can sense like depth and scale and stuff by using them as your source of reference, and it's just a kind of trippy experience to see your hands in a virtual game like that, and it opens up so many different avenues of gaming. The games that I love are like the really physical ones: Space Pirate Trainer, Audio Shield, Hollow Point, Hover Junkers. Those are all great games, and when you are done playing them for hours, you take off your headset and you feel like you've just been doing a light cardio workout, and it's actually a really satisfying thing to do, is to just play video games and also be getting a workout at the same time. And then there's other games too, though. There's games that are more relaxing, and you can just like walk around and look at things or investigate things or just play with physics. One of the funnest things that I've done in the Vive is just go into the lab where there's this game where you just walk around the solar system and you can pick up the planets and you play with them in no gravity physics. And I can just go in there for hours and play with the planets and throw them around and stuff and teleport around. I love roomscale. It's so fun. And yeah, so that's why I really believe that the Vive has the superior gaming experience right now. The Rift, on the other hand, is more about just seated experiences. There are some standing experiences on the Rift where they'll use mechanics like you turn your head to move your character around, or you move in the direction that you're looking so you can kind of like turn, and that makes it slightly immersive, but it's nothing compared to room scale and motion controls. And one of the problems I have with the Rift is that it just comes with an Xbox 360 controller, and a lot of the games that you use the Xbox controller on, it's just not satisfying, especially first-person games, because when you're in VR, it feels like you are the person, but then when you're using the controller, it's kind of this disconnect. I personally don't get motion sickness, but I know a lot of people do get motion sickness from those kind of experiences where you're not actually in control of what your character's doing. However, I will say that the Xbox controls work great for certain games, like Lucky's Tale, Chronos, the Adventure Time game. Those are games where you're looking at a character and you're controlling him, so it's kind of like you're this god who's just like controlling a character, telling him what to do, and it actually works really great for those games, and they're really fun. But the very best experiences on the Rift, in my opinion, are simulation games, and not with the Xbox controller, okay? You need the actual simulation controls for that. So the number one game in all of VR, in my opinion, Rift and Vive, is Elite Dangerous, and that's because this game has been in development for years now. It has a ton of content and a ton of depth, and you can sink hours and hours and hours into it. I'm talking hundreds of hours, compared to some of the native VR games where it's like, yeah, they're really cool and innovative and fun, but you might get like a 2-hour playthrough from the game, or if it's a game like Space Pirate Trainer, it's really fun, but it's also super repetitive, and you can't just put hours and hours and hours into it. You'll get bored after like 1 hour. But with Elite Dangerous, I play that game all the time. I love it. And I have the flight sticks. So these flight sticks actually correspond with what the controls look like in the game, and when I move them, the controls in the game move just like what I'm doing, which is really immersive. Like I was saying earlier, with when you're looking at your hands, it's basically the same thing, even though they're not actually tracked, but just with the way the game is set up, it's super immersive. In fact, I would say that Elite Dangerous is the most immersive experience I've had in VR so far, because a seated simulation experience like that, where you're in the cockpit and you're flying around a spaceship with the actual flight stick controls, it's super immersive because there's nothing that pulls you out and reminds you that you're in VR. Room scale experiences are really immersive too, don't get me wrong. It's just that when you're in room scale, you're so immersed that you're eventually going to walk into your wall and this huge grid is going to come up saying like, warning, this is a virtual reality game. Don't forget that. And, various other things like that. Like the fact that you do have your hands there, except they're just like floating in the air, so that's a little disconcerting. But yeah, the simulation games on the Vive are where it's at, in my opinion. Elite Dangerous is great. Project Cars, iRacing, if you want to play those. You want something like this, a little steering wheel you can use, that also makes it really immersive. But yeah, those are great uses of VR, so don't get discouraged if you're getting an Oculus and you hear me throwing shade at the Xbox controller. There are some good Xbox controller experiences, and there's some amazing simulation experiences. So room scale is not what VR is all about. Room scale is awesome, but there are also amazing seated experiences. So I feel like with the Rift, you can have some seriously mind-blowing, immersive VR experiences. However, with the Vive, you can have those same exact experiences, and you can have the room scale and motion control. So I really do feel like the Vive right now offers the best all-around VR package. So another area where the Vive has an advantage is in the software backend that kind of controls these VR devices. So the Vive uses SteamVR and the Rift uses Oculus Home. Now SteamVR is pretty awesome. It lets you look at all your games in a nice organized interface, and it also lets you manage your computer and your headset from within the headset. So managing the computer is one of the best parts, and I've realized that after using Oculus Home, where you can't manage your desktop, and it really annoys me because if I want to do any simple little thing on the desktop, I have to take off the headset, I have to grab the mouse and do it, whereas when you're in VR on this thing, you just click a button, go to the SteamVR interface, you click desktop, and then you can use your motion controller as your mouse, and you can do simple tasks on your computer, and it's really useful. You actually can use SteamVR in the Oculus Rift, and in fact that is what I do for the majority of the time. But it doesn't work as well because you are using the Xbox controller, so you can't really use that as a mouse. So you still can't manage your desktop very effectively. And then as far as the stores go, the way Steam works, the way SteamVR works is you obviously can buy games on Steam and play them, or you can just download games and you can run them directly off your computer, and that's fine. And you can do the same thing with Oculus because it runs SteamVR. But the problem is Oculus has this thing called the Oculus Store, and if you have an Oculus, I highly, highly recommend that you do not buy games in the Oculus Store if they're available on Steam. Because if you buy a game on the Oculus Store, they artificially restrict it to only work on the Rift. So if you buy Project Cars in the Oculus Store, you can't play it on the Vive if you were to get that down the line for whatever reason. Whereas if you bought it on Steam, you could play it on the Oculus or the Vive. And then the Oculus Store also has a zero tolerance refund policy. Buy a game, you are not going to get a refund no matter what. Whereas with Steam, they have an extremely lenient refund policy, which is great for VR because there's a lot of crappy VR games out there, VR shovelware. So I've returned quite a few games on Steam. And on Oculus Home, I've wanted to return one or two games, but just couldn't do it. So I highly recommend not using the Oculus Store as much as possible. Obviously, you do have to use it for certain things, like the Oculus exclusive games, which aren't actually exclusive. And that's another point that I wanted to touch on in this comparison, is people sometimes say, oh, one of the advantages of the Rift is that it has these good exclusive games. And they're not actually exclusive because someone made this simple mod called the Revival mod that lets you play them on the Vive, because it's not like they are limited to the hardware for any reason other than the fact that Oculus decided to make them exclusive. So all it takes is a little tweaking and suddenly you can play these exclusive games on the Vive. So if you want to talk about exclusive games, I feel like the Vive actually has the advantage there because room scale and motion control games are exclusive and there's a ton of them. Now, the Rift will eventually be getting motion controls. It's going to be getting these cool motion controllers called the Oculus Touch, and I'm excited to try them out. They look really cool. They're like little wheels that you hold in your hand, and it's going to be fun. So it's going to have motion control, but it's not going to have a room scale. So you're not going to be moving around as much as you would on the Vive. You can still move around. There's still going to be games where you're active and you're dodging and stuff, but it's mostly going to be like moving in a tiny little area and dodging in a tiny little area as opposed to just running around your whole room. You can kind of jury-rig a room scale setup for the Rift if you buy 2 Rift sensors and you set them up on opposite ends of your room and you run like USB extension cords to your computer and all this, and then you will technically have a room scale setup, but it's going to have dead zones, it's going to have low range, and just reliability problems. I mean, people have done this and people have reported on their experiences, so go look it up if it's something that sounds interesting to you. But based on what I've read, it doesn't really work as well as what you would get from the Vive straight out of the box. So if room scale is appealing to you, I would definitely recommend the Vive over the Rift. But the Rift is going to get some motion control. It'll be able to play a lot of the motion control games that are currently exclusive to the Vive. And if you have just a small area to work with, then I think the Rift is an excellent alternative to the Vive, because once it gets motion control, it will really be able to do almost everything that the Vive does if you're in a small area. If you have enough room for room scale and if you're willing to do this setup, then yeah, I do believe that you should go with the Vive over the Rift. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the small technical details of the Vive and the Rift and the displays that they use. Honestly, these aren't really important because when you're in VR, you don't really notice the difference, and your brain kind of compensates for any minute differences there are. So personally, from using both headsets, I wouldn't know that there is a difference, but there is, and I'm going to talk a little bit about it. So the Vive uses traditional Fresnel lenses, which means they basically have a bunch of concentric circles on them. So there's just a ton of these little circles on the Vive, and you can see them really well. You probably can't see them on the camera, but you can see them really well when you're looking at it in real life. And the Rift uses what's called hybrid Fresnel lenses, and the circles are much smoother, so you can't really see them unless you look super close. And basically, the effect that has is it gives the Vive a bigger field of view. And like I said earlier, don't really notice that in VR, because you want to be looking right in the middle at the sweet spot, and your brain kind of compensates for the rest. If you, on either device, if you look off to the side with your eyes, you are going to see the edges of the headset, just black edges. So the Vive has a bit bigger field of view. It doesn't really make a difference. And then the hybrid Fresnel lenses means that the Rift actually has a bigger sweet spot. So you can look at a wider area within the lens and still see like the ideal image that you want to see, whereas with the Vive, you really have to be looking right in the center. And then the coarser ridges means there's less diffusion of the pixels in the Vive, which means, okay, let me back up a little bit. There's this thing called the screen door effect, or SDE, where since you have these lenses so close to your face, by the way, they're both at 1200p resolution, but since it's so close to your eyes, you can actually see individual pixels. And a lot of the times you don't notice it, but on certain games you really do notice it, especially if they have really good graphics. So because of the coarse ridges on the Fresnel lenses in the Vive, it causes less diffusion of the pixels, which means the SDE effect on the Vive looks like the pixels are slightly bigger. So there's still SDE on the Rift, but the pixels look slightly smaller. And so like I said, it's not like I'm in there measuring the pixel size of the SDE. In fact, I hardly ever notice SDE unless I'm really looking for it. But yeah, so that's the difference between the displays. They both use the same resolution and everything. So the differences are very minor. I wouldn't buy one or the other based off the technical specs. You're going to get basically the same experience in terms of what you're looking at in both devices. Some other things about it is, so the Vive, you can actually adjust the distance between the lenses and your eyeballs by using these little knobs. And that's really useful if you wear glasses, because you don't want your glasses to be right up against the lenses. You might scratch them, or you might scratch your glasses or something. I don't actually use glasses, so I don't have personal experience with this, although I have had some friends who use glasses, and they've used the Vive with their glasses just fine. The Rift does not have any sort of adjustable lens distance between your eyes and the lenses, so you're going to have a bit more of an uncomfortable time using glasses in the Rift. It's still possible. I'm sure people still do it. I've read there's some issues with it, but overall, it's not a big deal. But if you want maximum adjustability, like if you use really big, thick glasses or something, that's an advantage for the Rift. And then they both have the IDE adjustment, or IDP, I think. I don't really remember the actual acronym. And that is the distance between your pupils or something. It's an important adjustment. But basically, all you have to do is look at an object in-game and adjust this little dial or this little knob right here until you see good clarity on the object. Or you can go to an eyeglasses store and get your IPD adjusted for free, or not adjusted, measured for free, and then they'll give you the number, and then you can just go tweak the knob to that number. But that's about it as far as the technical review. I mean, I'm not the most technical person, so I can't go super in depth. I haven't taken these apart and looked at the internal components or anything. But yeah, like I said earlier, the actual technical specs of the displays and stuff don't really make much of a difference if you compare the two. So don't base your purchase decision based off of that. So in conclusion, just to reiterate what I've been saying about the Vive this whole video, I think it offers the complete VR package right now. Seated, standing, moving, room scale, it has it all. It's fairly comfortable, not as comfortable as the Rift, but that's not enough of a reason to recommend the Rift over the Vive. I do recommend the Vive to anyone who's looking into VR, as long as you're able to set up even a small room scale space. I'm talking just enough room to stretch your arms out in both directions, then you should be okay. You don't need a huge space like I have here. If you don't have that space, if you just have a tiny space, then go ahead and get the Rift. It's a great device. You're going to have great seated experiences with it, and it's really comfy. Personally, as much as I heap praise onto the Vive, I'll probably be putting more VR hours into the Rift, just based on the fact that it's comfortable and that I love these simulation experiences, especially Elite Dangerous, because it's so deep and it offers so many hours of content and so much playability that I'll probably be putting most of my VR time into that one game. But you can also play that game on this. You can play all the simulation games on this. So if you had to choose one, I would choose the Vive. But they're both great devices. They'll both give you really fun VR experiences, and virtual reality in general is amazing. I suggest anyone who hasn't tried it to try and figure out some way to try it. I know they do demos at Best Buy and stuff. That might be worth it. Or find a friend who has it, because you really need to experience it to understand a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about. I mean, I can talk your ear about VR all day, but once you actually get in there, it'll all click, and you'll realize just how amazing of an experience it is. So thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, check out my channel. I put out a ton of VR videos for both the Oculus Rift and the HTC Vive. And I put out a ton of gameplay. I'm basically trying to get through all the games in VR and put out videos for them. So if you like gameplay videos, then definitely check me out. Throw me a sub. Anyways, thank you so much. Have a great day, and goodbye. This is one of my grid walls. It's right up against the wall, which is why I have smacked myself into the wall with the controller and the headset multiple times. This is the other grid. It protects me from bumping my feet on the fireplace thing here, as long as I pay attention to it. This is my computer, so I have a grid a little bit in front of it so I don't run into the desk or punch the monitor or something. There's the camera. Hi, camera. This is where I store the equipment, and then we have my couch and my coffee table, my TV, all that. All protected by the grid line.